This video is made for entertainment purposes only. I buried something that should have changed the world. My name is Marcus Webb, and for 37 years, I've carried a secret that's eaten me alive from the inside out. I was an excavator operator, good at my job, respected, never caused trouble. But in the spring of 1987, I made a choice that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat, hearing sounds that shouldn't exist. They paid me to forget. They threatened me into silence. And for decades, I obeyed. But now I'm 64 years old, and I'm dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. So before I go, I'm going to tell you what I found beneath the forests of the Pacific Northwest, what the Cascade Development Corporation made me bury, and what came for me afterward. This isn't a campfire story. This isn't folklore. This is a confession. March of 1987 was unusually warm in the Cascade Mountains, about 40 miles northeast of Eugene, Oregon. The snowmelt came early that year, and that meant construction season started ahead of schedule. I was working for Timber Ridge Construction, a mid-sized outfit that had landed a massive contract with Cascade Development Corporation, CDC for short. They were building the Crown Peak Resort, a luxury destination that promised to bring high-end tourism to the region. Spa facilities, conference centers, 200 private cabins, a golf course, the whole 9 yards. The project was worth $60 million, which in 1987 was a fortune. CDC had investors from California, Seattle, even overseas. There were deadlines, penalties for delays, and intense pressure from the top down. Everyone knew that if this project succeeded, there'd be more work, more money, more opportunities. If it failed, or if anything slowed it down, heads would roll. I was the lead excavator operator. I'd been running heavy machinery for 15 years by then, backhoes, bulldozers, graders, you name it. My job was to dig the foundation for the main lodge, a massive 3-story structure that would sit on a plateau overlooking a pristine valley. The site was remote, surrounded by old-growth forest, Douglas fir, western red cedar, hemlocks that had been standing for 300 years. Beautiful, untouched land. We started clearing in late February. By mid-March, I was deep into the excavation work, pulling out layers of soil, clay, and rock. The ground was dense but workable. Everything was going according to plan. Until March 19th. It was a Thursday. I remember because my wife had packed me leftover meatloaf for lunch, and I was looking forward to it. The morning had been routine: diesel fumes, the rhythmic groan of hydraulics, the satisfying bite of the bucket teeth into the earth. I was about 12 feet down, widening the foundation trench, when I felt the machine shudder. At first, I thought I'd hit bedrock or a buried log. It happened sometimes. But when I pulled the bucket back and looked into the trench, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Bone. Not a deer femur or a bear skull. This was massive. A curved section of what looked like a rib cage, bleached white and ancient, jutting out from the clay like the hull of a shipwreck. I killed the engine and climbed down to get a closer look. The bones were enormous. Each rib was thicker than my forearm and at least 4 feet long. I brushed away some of the dirt with my glove and realized I was looking at an intact skeleton, or at least a substantial portion of one. There was a skull partially visible deeper in the clay, and nearby, scattered around the remains, were worked stones. Tools. Crude, yes, but unmistakably intentional. Hand axes, scrapers, something that looked like a grinding stone. And arranged around the bones were objects that seemed decorative: smooth river stones, pieces of carved wood that had somehow survived the centuries, and what looked like the remnants of woven plant fibers. This wasn't just a burial. This was a tomb. I stood there in that trench, mud up to my ankles, staring at something that shouldn't exist. My hands were shaking. I'm not an anthropologist, but I'd seen enough to know what I was looking at: evidence of culture, of ritual, of thought. And the size of those bones. I knew what people called them in these mountains. Sasquatch. Bigfoot. The legends that loggers and hunters whispered about around campfires. Massive, human-like creatures that lived in the deepest forests, avoiding contact, leaving only footprints and blurry photographs. But this wasn't a legend. This was real. I was standing in front of proof. I climbed out of the trench and radioed the site foreman, a man named Dale Kutcher. Dale was in his 50s, ex-military, no nonsense. He arrived 10 minutes later in his mud-splattered pickup, a cigarette hanging from his lips. "What's the hold-up, Webb?" he called out as he approached. "You need to see this," I said. He followed me to the edge of the trench, looked down, and went silent. The cigarette fell from his mouth. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. We stood there for a long moment. Then Dale pulled out his radio and called the project manager, a CDC executive named Raymond Voss. Voss was based in a trailer office about half a mile away, coordinating logistics, dealing with suppliers and subcontractors. He was a sharp-dressed corporate type, always on the phone, always in a hurry. Voss arrived within the hour, accompanied by 2 other CDC representatives I'd never seen before, a woman in a business suit and a man with a briefcase. They climbed down into the trench carefully, their expensive shoes sinking into the mud, and examined the remains in silence. I expected them to be excited, or at least curious. Instead, they looked worried. The woman took photographs with a Polaroid camera. The man made notes on a clipboard. Voss stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. Finally, he climbed back out and motioned for Dale and me to follow him away from the trench, out of earshot of the other workers who had started to gather. "This doesn't leave the site," Voss said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "Not a word to anyone. Not your crew, not your families, no one." "With all due respect, Mr. Voss," I said, "this is a major find. We need to report this to—" "We don't need to do anything," Voss interrupted. "What we need is to stay on schedule. We have investors, deadlines, and contracts. If word gets out that we've found something here, we'll have archaeologists, government agencies, media crawling all over this site. The project will be delayed for months, maybe years. Do you understand what that means?" Dale nodded slowly. "You're saying we cover it up?" "I'm saying we handle it internally," Voss corrected. "We'll document everything, take samples, and report it through the proper channels when the time is right. But right now, the priority is keeping this project moving." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "You want me to just bury it?" Voss looked at me with the kind of expression you'd give a child who doesn't understand how the world works. "Mr. Webb, you're being paid very well to operate that machine. Tomorrow morning, you're going to fill in that trench, pour the foundation, and forget you ever saw anything. In return, Cascade Development Corporation will provide you with a bonus, let's say $50,000, and a guarantee of future work. Or—" He let the word hang in the air. "Or?" I asked. "Or we terminate your contract, blacklist you in the industry, and make sure you never operate heavy machinery again. Your choice." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of me, staring at the wall. My wife, Linda, had gone to bed hours ago, but I could hear her moving restlessly upstairs. She knew something was wrong. $50,000 was more money than I'd ever seen in one place. It could pay off our mortgage, put our daughter through college, give us security. And the alternative, losing my career, my reputation, everything I'd worked for, was unthinkable. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bones, that skull, those tools. Someone had lived. Someone had been. And someone had cared enough to bury them with honor. And I was being asked to erase all of it. I thought about calling the authorities, the press, anyone who might listen. But I was just a working man in a small town, going up against a multimillion-dollar corporation with lawyers and connections. Who would believe me? And even if they did, what would it cost me? By dawn, I'd made my decision. I would do what they asked. God forgive me, I would bury it. The next morning, I climbed back into the excavator with a sick feeling in my gut. The site was empty except for Dale, Voss, and a concrete truck that had arrived before sunrise. They wanted this done quickly and quietly. I fired up the engine, positioned the bucket over the trench, and began pushing dirt back into the hole. Every scoop felt like a betrayal. The bones disappeared beneath layers of clay and rock. The tools, the decorations, the evidence of a life, all of it vanished. When the trench was filled, The concrete truck moved into position. I watched as they poured thousands of gallons of cement over the site, sealing it forever beneath the foundation of the Crown Peak Resort's main lodge. By noon, it was done. Voss handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a legal document, a non-disclosure agreement with penalties so severe they made my head spin. "You did the right thing, Marcus," Voss said, shaking my hand. I didn't feel like I'd done the right thing. I felt like I'd committed murder. The first incident happened 3 weeks after the burial. I'd convinced myself that I could live with what I'd done. The money was in the bank. Linda and I had paid off the mortgage, and she was thrilled, even though I couldn't tell her where the bonus had really come from. I told her CDC was pleased with my work, which wasn't technically a lie. Our daughter, Amy, was enrolled at the University of Oregon for the fall. Everything should have been perfect. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It started subtly. I'd be working on site, and I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow slipping between the trees, too large and too deliberate to be a deer. When I'd turn to look, there was nothing there. Just the forest, silent and still. Then came the sounds. Late at night, when I was trying to sleep, I'd hear them. Knocking. Deep, resonant wood knocks that echoed through the darkness. Thump, 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 like someone striking a hollow tree with a club. The first time it happened, I thought it was kids messing around in the woods behind our property. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, but there was no one there. The knocking continued. 3 strikes, then silence. Then 3 more, from a different direction. Linda heard it too. "What is that?" she whispered, clutching my arm. "Probably just a woodpecker," I lied. "Or a tree branch hitting the house." But we both knew it wasn't. The knocking happened every night for a week. Always the same pattern. Always after midnight. And each night, it seemed to get closer to the house. Then the dreams started. I was back in the trench, but this time I was alone. The excavator was gone. The construction site was gone. It was just me, standing in a deep pit of red clay, surrounded by bones. Not just one skeleton now. Dozens of them. Men, women, children. All of them enormous, all of them arranged in careful burial positions. And they were looking at me. I could feel their eyes, even though they were nothing but skulls. I could feel their accusation, their grief, their rage. In the dream, I tried to climb out, but the walls of the trench kept crumbling, pulling me deeper. The bones began to move, reaching for me with skeletal hands, and I could hear a sound rising from the earth itself, a low, mournful howl that made my bones vibrate. I woke up screaming. Linda was beside me, shaking me, her face pale with fear. "Marcus, what's wrong? You're scaring me." I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell anyone. The dreams came every night after that. Sometimes I was in the trench. Sometimes I was in the forest, being stalked by something I couldn't see. Sometimes I was standing over the fresh concrete foundation, and I could hear scratching from beneath it. Frantic, desperate scratching, as if something was trying to claw its way out. I stopped sleeping. I started drinking more. I'd sit in the garage until dawn, working on projects I didn't need to finish, doing anything to avoid lying down and closing my eyes. By May, the phenomena had escalated beyond sounds and dreams. I was working on a different site, a highway expansion project about 20 miles away. I'd requested a transfer from the Crown Peak job, claiming I needed a change of pace. Dale had given me a strange look but approved it. I think he knew something was wrong, but he didn't ask. I was operating a bulldozer, clearing brush, when the engine suddenly died. Just stopped, mid-operation, as if someone had cut the fuel line. I tried to restart it. Nothing. I checked the gauges. Everything was fine. No mechanical reason for the shutdown. Then I felt it. A presence. The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. The air became thick, oppressive, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. And I heard it, a sound I'd heard before only on blurry audio recordings that people dismissed as hoaxes. A howl. Not a wolf. Not a bear. Something deeper, more resonant, more deliberate. It came from the tree line, maybe 200 yards away, and it cut through me like a blade. Every hair on my body stood up. My heart hammered in my chest. The other workers heard it too. They stopped what they were doing, tools frozen in their hands, staring toward the forest. "What the hell was that?" someone shouted. I didn't answer. I climbed down from the bulldozer on shaking legs and walked away from the machine. I needed air. I needed space. That's when I saw the footprint. It was in the soft mud near the edge of the clearing. Massive, at least 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. The impression was deep, indicating enormous weight. And it was fresh. The edges were still crisp, the water still pooling in the deepest part. Something had been standing there. Recently. Watching me. I looked up at the tree line, and for just a moment, I saw it. A figure. Enormous, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair. It stood motionless among the shadows, and I swear to God, it was looking directly at me. Then it turned and vanished into the forest, moving with impossible speed and silence. I quit that job the same day. By June, I'd stopped working altogether. I told Linda I was taking time off, that I needed a break. She was worried, but the money from CDC was still in the bank, so we weren't desperate yet. But I was falling apart. The knocking continued every night. The dreams became more vivid, more violent. I started seeing things during the day, shadows moving in broad daylight, shapes standing at the edge of our property, watching the house. I installed motion sensor lights around the property. They went off constantly, sometimes 3 or 4 times a night, but there was never anyone there. Just empty yard, empty driveway. Except for the footprints. They appeared in our garden, in the soft dirt near the fence, even on our back porch after a rain. Always the same size. Always pointing toward the house. Linda found one of them and called the sheriff. Deputy Harris came out, looked at the print, and scratched his head. "Could be a bear," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "But I've never seen a bear print quite like that. You folks might want to keep your garbage locked up, just in case." I didn't tell him what I knew it really was. The worst incident happened in late July. I was alone in the house. Linda had taken Amy to visit her sister in Portland for the weekend. I was sitting in the living room, drinking, trying to work up the courage to do something I'd been considering for weeks. Call the press. Call a university. Call someone and tell them what I'd found and what CDC had made me do. That's when I heard footsteps on the roof. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, walking back and forth above my head, from one end of the house to the other. The ceiling creaked under the weight. I grabbed a baseball bat and ran outside, but there was nothing on the roof. No ladder, no way for anyone to have climbed up. But when I looked at the shingles in the morning light, there were impressions, handprints and footprints pressed into the asphalt shingles with enough force to leave dents. I took photographs. I documented everything. I filled 3 notebooks with dates, times, descriptions of every incident. But I still didn't tell anyone. Because I knew that if I spoke up, if I broke the NDA, CDC would destroy me. And who would believe me anyway? A washed-up excavator operator claiming he was being haunted by Bigfoot? They'd lock me up. The breaking point came in mid-August. Linda confronted me one morning at breakfast. She put down her coffee cup and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Marcus, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what's happening to you, but you're not the man I married. You're drinking, you're not sleeping, you're jumping at shadows. Amy's afraid to come home from college because she doesn't know what she'll find. You need help. Please." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to unburden myself, to explain why I was falling apart. But the words wouldn't come. "I'm fine," I said. "I just need more time." "Time for what?" she demanded. "Marcus, there's something wrong with this house. I hear things. I see things. That money you brought home, where did it really come from? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I snapped. But that was a lie, and we both knew it. That night, Linda packed a bag and left with Amy. She said she'd stay with her sister until I got myself together. I didn't blame her. I was alone. And that's when they came closer. 3 days after Linda left, I woke up at 3 a.m. to find my bedroom window open. I never opened that window. It was painted shut, had been for years. But there it was, wide open, cold air pouring into the room. I got out of bed and approached it cautiously. That's when I saw them. 3 figures standing in my backyard, just beyond the circle of light from the motion sensors. They were massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight. They stood completely still, watching the house. Watching me. My breath caught in my throat. My legs felt like water. I wanted to run, to hide, to scream, but I couldn't move. Then the largest one, standing in the center, raised its arm and pointed at me. Not aggressively, not threateningly, just pointed, as if to say, "We know what you did." I don't know how long we stood there, locked in that silent confrontation. It felt like hours. Finally, one of them made a sound, a low, rumbling vocalization that wasn't quite language but carried unmistakable meaning. Grief, anger, loss. Then they turned and walked back into the forest, moving silently despite their size, and disappeared into the darkness. I collapsed onto the floor and wept. Not from fear, though I was terrified, but from guilt. From the crushing weight of what I'd done. I'd destroyed something sacred. I'd erased evidence of their existence, their history, their dead. And they knew. They'd come to tell me they knew. And they weren't going to let me forget. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't undo what I'd done. I couldn't bring back the bones, the tools, the tomb. But I could tell the world. I could expose CDC, break the NDA, and face the consequences. I gathered my notebooks, my photographs, the documentation I'd been keeping. I made copies and stored them in 3 different locations, a safety deposit box, with my lawyer, and with a friend I trusted. Then I started making calls. I started with the local newspapers, the Eugene Register-Guard, the Oregonian, small-town weeklies that might actually listen to a nobody like me. I called their offices, asked to speak to investigative reporters, and left messages that probably sounded insane. I have evidence of a cover-up involving Cascade Development Corporation and the discovery of non-human remains. Most didn't call back. The ones who did sounded skeptical, even bored. Mr. Webb, are you saying you found Bigfoot? Do you have physical evidence? Bones. DNA. They made me bury it, I explained. It's under the foundation of the Crown Peak Resort. But I have photographs of the site before they covered it up. I have documentation. There was always a pause. Then, we'll look into it and get back to you. They never did. I tried the universities next. Portland State, University of Oregon, even reaching out to anthropology departments in Washington and California. I sent letters with copies of my photographs, grainy Polaroids showing the partial skeleton, the tools, the tomb structure. I included detailed descriptions, coordinates, everything. Nothing. No responses. No interest. Or maybe CDC got to them first. I wouldn't put it past a corporation with that much money and influence to make a few calls, apply a little pressure, ensure that nobody took me seriously. By late October, I was desperate. That's when I contacted Roger Patterson. For those who don't know, Roger Patterson was the man who filmed the most famous piece of Bigfoot footage in history. The 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film, shot at Bluff Creek in Northern California. The creature walking through the clearing, looking back at the camera. That footage had made him a legend in cryptozoology circles, but it had also made him a target for skeptics and debunkers. Patterson had died in 1972, but I managed to track down Bob Gimlin, his partner on that expedition. Gimlin was still alive, living quietly in Washington State, and he agreed to meet with me. We met at a diner in Yakima in early November. Gimlin was in his 50s then, a lean, weathered man with the cautious eyes of someone who'd been ridiculed for decades. He listened to my story without interruption, studying my photographs, reading my notes. When I finished, he sat back and let out a long breath. "You know what you're asking for, don't you?" he said quietly. "The moment you go public with this, your life is over. They'll call you a liar, a fraud, a lunatic. They'll dig into your past, find every mistake you've ever made, and use it to discredit you. And CDC, they'll bury you in lawsuits." "I know," I said. "But I can't live with this anymore. What I did, what they made me do, it was wrong. Those people, those beings, they deserved better. Their dead deserve to be honored, not erased." Gimlin studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said. "And I know people who'll listen. Give me your documentation. Let me make some calls." Gimlin was true to his word. Within weeks, my story started circulating through the Bigfoot research community, a network of enthusiasts, investigators, and believers who operated mostly outside mainstream academia. They published my account in newsletters and small press magazines. The photographs appeared in cryptozoology journals. Researchers began analyzing the images, comparing the bone structures to known primates and hominids. Some declared it the most significant evidence ever produced. Others called it an elaborate hoax. But the story was out there. And that's when CDC responded. In December of 1987, I received a letter from their legal department. It was 8 pages long and written in dense legalese, but the message was clear. I had violated the non-disclosure agreement. I was being sued for breach of contract, defamation, and corporate espionage. They were seeking the return of the $50,000 plus damages totaling over $2 million. They also sent a private investigator to interview my neighbors, my former co-workers, anyone who might provide dirt on me. Within a month, stories started appearing in the local press, not about the discovery, but about me. Local man claims Bigfoot cover-up, experts call him delusional. Excavator operator breaks contract, faces lawsuit. They painted me as unstable, unreliable, possibly mentally ill. And it worked. Linda filed for divorce in January. She said she couldn't live with the stress, the harassment, the reporters showing up at her sister's house. I didn't fight it. What could I say? I'd brought this on both of us. I lost my house to legal fees. I lost my career. No construction company would touch me after CDC blacklisted me. I ended up working odd jobs, living in a trailer park, surviving on what little I could scrape together. But I didn't regret it, because people knew. The story was out there, and some people believed. In the spring of 1988, a team of independent researchers petitioned the Oregon State Historic Preservation Office to investigate the Crown Peak resort site. They cited my testimony, the photographs, and historical records of Native American legends in the region describing giant hairy men who lived in the deep forests. The petition was denied. The official reason was insufficient evidence to warrant disruption of private property and ongoing business operations. But the researchers didn't give up. A group called the Western Sasquatch Research Coalition, led by a man named Dr. Henry Dalton, a retired anthropologist from UC Berkeley, organized an informal investigation. They interviewed me extensively, analyzed my photographs with enhanced imaging technology, and even attempted to access the construction site. They were turned away by security, threatened with trespassing charges, and eventually forced to abandon the effort. But Dr. Dalton published a paper in a fringe academic journal titled Evidence of Possible Gigantopithecus Burial Site in Oregon, a case study in corporate suppression of scientific discovery. It didn't make mainstream waves, but it added legitimacy to my claims within certain circles. And most importantly, it kept the story alive. You might think that once I'd exposed the truth, once I'd done the right thing, the paranormal activity would stop. It didn't. If anything, it got worse. Throughout the late 1980s and into the 1990s, I continued to experience phenomena that I can only describe as a haunting. The knocking, the footprints, the dreams, the sense of being watched. But there was something else now, something that felt less like punishment and more like communication. I started finding objects on my doorstep, stones arranged in patterns. Twisted branches formed into symbols I didn't understand. Once, I found a small carving, a crude but deliberate representation of a human figure and a larger figure standing side by side. I kept these objects. I documented them. And over time, I began to understand what was happening. They weren't trying to punish me anymore. They were trying to make sure I remembered. That I never forgot. And I haven't. Life moved on, as it does. The Crown Peak Resort opened in 1989 and became exactly what CDC had envisioned. A successful luxury destination that brought millions of dollars into the region. The main lodge, built directly over the tomb I discovered, won architectural awards. Tourists came from around the world to stay in that building, walk across that floor, completely unaware of what lay beneath. I moved around a lot in the years that followed. Oregon, Washington, Montana. I could never stay in one place for long. The dreams always found me. The knocking always returned. I remarried briefly in the mid-1990s. A kind woman named Sarah who tried to understand my past but eventually couldn't handle the strangeness that seemed to follow me. We parted on good terms. I worked where I could, mostly manual labor, never using my real name if I could avoid it. CDC's lawsuit had been settled eventually. I declared bankruptcy, and they wrote off the debt, but the damage to my reputation was permanent. The Bigfoot research community stayed in touch. I became something of a minor legend among them, the man who'd found proof and paid the price. I gave interviews to documentaries, spoke at small conferences, shared my story with anyone who would listen. Some believed me. Most didn't. But I kept talking. In 2015, something unexpected happened. A group of construction workers doing renovations on the Crown Peak Resort, now under new ownership after CDC had sold it years earlier, reported strange findings during foundation repairs. They drilled core samples and found what they described as unusual dense material beneath the concrete, along with fragments that resembled organic matter. The new owners, unaware of the site's history, commissioned a ground-penetrating radar survey. The results were inconclusive, but they showed anomalies consistent with large objects buried beneath the foundation, objects with densities matching bone. The story made local news. Researchers reached out. And suddenly, people were talking about my claims again, 30 years later. A documentary filmmaker contacted me in 2017. We spent months working together, and he produced a film called Buried Truth, The Crown Peak Cover-Up. It featured my interviews, the original photographs, expert analysis, and testimony from others who'd worked on the site and had their own strange experiences. The documentary didn't go viral, but it found an audience. It's on streaming platforms now. People watch it. People ask questions. And every few months, someone new reaches out to me to say they believe me. It's not vindication, not really. The bones are still buried. CDC was never held accountable. The scientific community still dismisses the story. But it's something. Which brings me to now. I'm 64 years old, and I'm dying. The cancer is aggressive, and the treatments aren't working. I have weeks left, maybe a month or two if I'm unlucky. I'm not afraid of death. After everything I've experienced, I'm almost curious about what comes next. But before I go, I needed to tell this story one more time. Fully. Completely. Without legal fear or corporate threats or concern about my reputation. The tomb exists. The remains are real. They're still there, beneath the Crown Peak Resort's main lodge, entombed in concrete and forgotten by the world. But not by me. And not, I believe, by them. I still hear the knocking sometimes, even here in the hospice. 3 deliberate strikes, distant but clear. The nurses say it's the building settling, but I know better. They're still watching. Still waiting. And when I die, I think I'll finally understand what they've been trying to tell me all these years. If you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, I have one request. Don't let this story die with me. The coordinates of the Crown Peak Resort are public information. The main lodge sits at approximately 43.8 degrees north, 122.3 degrees west, 40 miles northeast of Eugene, Oregon. The foundation was poured in March of 1987, in a trench approximately 12 feet deep. Beneath that concrete is proof that we are not alone on this planet. Proof that other intelligent beings exist, that they have culture and language and rituals, that they bury their dead with honor and ceremony. and proof that when faced with evidence that challenges our understanding of the world, powerful people will choose profit over truth, silence over discovery, erasure over acknowledgement. I made a choice in March of 1987 that I've regretted every day since. I chose money and security over doing what was right. And I've paid for that choice in ways I never imagined. But you don't have to make the same choice. If enough people demand the truth, if enough pressure is applied, maybe, someone will finally excavate that site. Maybe scientists will analyze those remains. Maybe the world will learn that the legends were real all along. Or maybe the concrete will stay in place, and the tomb will remain hidden forever. Either way, I've done what I can. I've told the truth. The rest is up to you. My name is Marcus Webb. I buried something that should have changed the world. And I've spent 37 years trying to uncover it again. Now, as I face the end, I hear them calling one last time. 3 knocks in the darkness, patient and eternal. They're waiting for someone to remember. Please don't let them be forgotten.